Our main character's name is Michael, who was an ordinary college student until the world was overrun by zombies 20 years ago. All the last years of his life, all he did was try to survive in a new environment full of dangers. Over the years, his mind began to crumble from the realization that he would not be able to meet his family, whom he abandoned in order to survive in this harsh world. Being on the verge of death, he was not afraid of it because he understood that his entire existence was meaningless. In the heat of battle, he finally found peace, but by some unusual miracle he found himself in his children's room, assuming that his life was flashing before his eyes. Looking around, he cannot believe that he found himself in the very place that was destroyed exactly 20 years ago, when everything began to change rapidly. Looking at the photograph next to his bed, in which he is carrying his younger sister in his arms, it seems to him that everything that is happening is just a figment of his imagination. Everything around seems quite real because our main character feels the smells and touches of his body, which in the reflection reminds him of a young and stupid child. At that very second, he remembers that it was on this day that the apocalypse began and decides to check where his younger sister is now. He remembers how on that fateful day his cowardice and fear at the sight of danger took over and controlled his body. Seeing the first infected person, he abandoned his sister, sitting in a wheelchair, leaving her to die, and then regretted it all his life. After the memories come flooding back to him, he looks at the calendar and the exact time, realizing that his assumption about the events of 20 years ago turns out to be true. Michael realizes that, apparently, somehow magically he really returned 20 years into the past. Opening the door of the room, he sees his younger sister sitting in a wheelchair, watching the wonderful flow of life outside the window. Unable to contain his emotions, the main character rushes into the arms of his sister Sylvia with tears, and she does not understand what is happening. The confused girl, thinking that her brother had a bad dream, tries to calm him down, but he, without explaining anything, says that he will not make the mistakes that he managed to survive. He wipes the remaining tears from his tear-stained face with his hands and asks his sister to stay at home while he goes away for a while on business. Sylvia asks him not to rush and removes one of the hairpins from her head and gives it to the main character, saying that when he returns alive he will give it back. Having promised his sister to return soon, the main character changes clothes, realizing that there is very little time left before the start of the apocalypse, and he needs to prepare properly. The main problem after the start of the apocalypse was resources, and a small convenience store was at the price of a human life, so Michael goes shopping. The girls working in the store are discouraged by the number of goods that our main character buys and decide that he is not himself. Having collected almost most of all the goods from the store shelves, the main character asks if there is still some food lying around in their warehouse. When the girls ask how he plans to deliver all these goods home, the main character points to a real van near the store. After some time, having paid for all purchases and loaded the contents into the car, even the driver is surprised why our main character needs so many supplies. While they are not leaving, the man looks at a photograph of his family, and tells our main character that he needs to devote more time to his loved ones because sooner or later it will end. Having finished unloading supplies, the man is about to say goodbye to Michael, but he stops him because he wants to give him something. The main character asks the driver to finish work for today and go to his family, since in the near future the world will change a lot, and he needs to protect them. After some time, Michael begins to make weapons for self-defense from scrap materials. His preparation is interrupted by Sylvia, whose appearance clearly shows that she does not understand what is happening and expresses her dissatisfaction. She starts yelling at her brother because she has received a notice that all the accumulated money has been withdrawn from their joint account, and she demands an immediate explanation. Her brother smiles and asks her not to be so angry and, with the hope of understanding, says that the apocalypse is coming and asks her to believe him. The surprised girl puts her forehead to her brother's head, thinking that he has a fever because what he says seems like a child's prank. Michael sincerely asks to believe in his words and asks his sister to enjoy the clean air and peaceful sky above her head for the last time. Sylvia says that her brother is acting very strange today and doing rash and very strange things. But the girl notices that for the first time in her life she sees Michael so serious, and this makes her not deny what she heard. I understand the seriousness of the situation. The main character remembers that in the first week after the start of all events, 90% of the world's population will die or turn into zombies. Somewhere in the city after nightfall, an unknown man receives a message from his superiors that makes him angry, and he hears a dog barking nearby. Dissatisfied with the fact that he will have to work all weekend, he throws his phone with all his might towards the dog, splashing out his anger, after which he sees how it turns out to be an unusual dog, but a mutated animal that rushes at its offender. Watching the beginning of chaos on the streets of the city, our heroes come into real primitive horror. Sylvia, shocked by what she saw, asks her brother what is happening when suddenly someone starts knocking on the door of their apartment. The girl hears in her voice that it is their neighbor who is calling for help, and the main character remembers that in the past it was because of her that they encountered the first zombie. Sylvia hurries to open the door as their neighbor's cries for help become more and more intrusive. Having opened the doorway, she sees in front of her the frightened face of a woman who lives nearby and asks what happened to her. Any emotion disappears from Sylvia's face as she sees an angry mutant behind the woman's back. Memories from a past life slip through our protagonist's head, in which he, along with other survivors, went on a very important mission. Their group found themselves surrounded on all sides by high-level monsters and panic reigned among them. The main character tried his best to buy some time for his comrades to retreat, while fighting enemies superior to them in strength. Looking around, he noticed his close friend, who asked for forgiveness and simply left him to die, and he ran away. Michael remembered that he himself had once done the same thing, leaving his defenseless sister all alone. At that moment, he realized how desperate and helpless Sylvia felt and managed to react and threw the weapon he had made towards the infected. Michael asked his sister to close her eyes, promising that he would protect her at all costs, and everything would be fine with them. He asks Sylvia to stay put, and sees how the zombie with a stick sticking out of its skull rushes into the attack again in the hope of tearing apart the pathetic people. The main character, with ease and equanimity on his face, parries the attacker's attack and cuts off one of his limbs. He understands that in front of him is now the first, lowest level of zombies that appeared at the very beginning of the apocalypse, and they do not have intelligence. Without any problems, with a few lightning-fast movements, he deals with the infected using his many years of experience. After defeating the enemy, Sylvia tugs on the hem of his jacket, asking her brother to stop fighting. Michael hugs his sister, saying that it's all over and everything will definitely be fine with her, after which he begins to look around because he hears someone's voice. His sister, not understanding what is happening to her brother, tries to help him, but the main character begins to lose consciousness. After some time, he comes to his senses and sees a strange sanctuary around him, shrouded in a blue glow and draining incredible energy. A few moments later, the statues located in the circle of the sanctuary shoot powerful beams of energy from their eyes at our hero. Our main character's head begins to split from the enormous amount of information entering his brain, and he sees information windows pop up in front of his eyes. His body begins to change rapidly, and the voice of the system in his head says that a restructuring and study of genes is taking place. Having completed the transformation of the main character, he informs that the recognition of the owner of the system is completed and he finds himself in a changed body. Michael feels his body filled with vital energy, and contextual windows in his head tell him that he can improve himself and his skills. He understands that in order to develop he needs to pay evolution points, which he will need to earn by killing various infected people. He can spend evolution points on various characteristics of his body such as strength, detection speed, intelligence, and so on. Having received his first points, he decides to upgrade his strength indicators to increase his chances of survival. Better than his skills, he suddenly feels a surge of strength in his body and hopes that this time he will be able to change his future thanks to this strength. After distributing the points, he again loses consciousness and comes to his senses already in our world, watching how his sister waited all this time for him to wake up. Having regained consciousness, the protagonist's sister immediately says that her brother scared her very much because he fainted too quickly, and she did not know what to do. Sylvia starts crying and says that she couldn't bear it if something happened to her brother, and he pats her on the head and explains that everything will be fine. Having regained consciousness, Michael immediately understands that he needs to deal with the corpse of their neighbor. Otherwise even more zombies will come here. But upon leaving the door he discovers that she is missing. Instead of a lifeless body, he sees only a pool of blood and a trail that stretches along the stairs to the lower floors. Realizing that he will have to clear the entire perimeter in order to remain safe, the main character decides to change his clothes since they have become too small for him. Thanks to evolution, he grew a lot and gained muscle mass, and his body became much stronger and more resilient. Sylvia, who has moved into the room, gives her brother their father's things, which should be just the right size for him. While waiting for the t-shirt to be put on, the girl begins to worry about the state of their parents now, because there is real chaos going on in the world. She remembers how their parents left them alone when they were 10 years old, and after that they were left to their own devices most of the time. After that, Mom and Dad started sending them money every year, and only this fact hinted at their existence. Having finished changing clothes, the main character asks his sister not to worry, because their parents are quite independent. Looking at her brother, Sylvia still cannot believe that in just one night, he has grown so much and changed in appearance. Michael tries to make an excuse and blames everything on a hormonal imbalance in his body, and also reports that he will need to leave for a while. Sylvia is very worried about her brother, and says that she is scared because the world has changed so much, and she is afraid of becoming a burden for him. The main character tries to calm his sister down, explaining that he just wants to look around and make sure their shelter is safe. He asks his sister not to think that she is a burden for him because he does not want to be in the place of their neighbor, and in such a difficult time they definitely need to hold on to each other. Sylvia agrees with him and asks him to return as soon as possible, finally giving him her hairpin, which, according to tradition, he must return. Armed with a dagger, our main hero leaves the walls of his apartment and goes on reconnaissance. He examines the bloody trail left on the floor after the zombie he killed, and realizing that they live on the top floor, all the danger will be below. Michael begins to slowly walk down the stairs, carefully examining each floor and checking all sorts of rooms until he comes across new infected people. As soon as the zombie notices our main character, he immediately begins to move in his direction, uttering incomprehensible phrases. Having rushed to attack our protagonist, the infected suffers inevitable defeat, since Michael has plenty of skills and experience in fighting high-level enemies. The context menu informs the main character that for each entry-level zombie he receives 1 evolution point. Also looking at the improvement window, he sees that to improve different skills, different numbers of evolution points are required, and to increase the same power he needs 6 points. The most expensive thing is to pump up the mental spirit, because in a past life he heard about people who had various skills of the mental spirit, and decides that this is perhaps the most important characteristic. Looking at his skills, he understands that to obtain the ability he needs the 10th level of mental spirit, and at the moment it is better to pump up other skills and leave it for later. As I descend to lower and lower floors, our protagonist's main priority goal is to kill as many infected as possible. Inspecting the next apartment, he sees traces of blood on the walls and furniture, which indicates a recent battle. Going into the bath, he sees the lifeless body of a woman who, apparently, did not have time to turn into a zombie. Michael understands perfectly well that not everyone is able to withstand such drastic changes in life, and it is easier to interrupt their own life. At that very second, his detection skills allow him to react to an infected person behind him. Having opened its huge mouth, the zombie is already about to sink its teeth into our protagonist and bite off a huge piece of flesh from him. The main character manages to react and, using his dagger, pierces the mutant attacking him right through the skull. In no case should he let his guard down, because the tree of evolution did not make him immortal. After clearing the next floor, he decides not to hesitate and continue to inspect the building because he doesn't have much time left. While examining the next floor, he is noticed by a certain woman who managed to survive and apparently is also one of the residents of this house. After knocking on the door and asking if there are survivors here, the woman looks out of the doorway and says that her apartment is safe and asks to be left alone. The main character asks to be allowed to personally verify the safety of her shelter because he does not want to use force. The woman nevertheless decides to let the main character into her apartment for a while, where everything looks quite peaceful and calm. While looking around the room, Michael notices a photograph hanging on the wall and decides to ask where her husband and child are now. The woman replies that her son is at school, and her husband went to meet him and they still have not returned, and she is very worried about them. After which she asks him to leave her apartment because she is very scared, and as soon as our main character is about to leave, he hears strange sounds coming from the bedroom. He immediately decides to check what exactly is causing the noise, and a woman with a scared look on her face tries to stop him, saying that there is no one else here. Michael begins to open the doorway on the back side of which blood can be seen, and the woman tries her best to stop him. Entering the room, he sees a small silhouette of a man holding a bloody corpse in his hand. This frightening image, apparently, is the son of the same woman who turned into a zombie. With a crazy smile, he asks to play with him. At this same second, the main character manages to react to the fact that the woman standing behind him is trying to attack him. Having dodged the attack, he does not understand what is happening, asks why she behaves this way and why she decided to hide the presence of the infected. Without waiting for an answer, the boy immediately attacks him, making Michael surprised at how fast zombie children are. Using his new body, the main character falls on his back and with a powerful movement of his legs throws away the body of the attacker. The woman he met immediately stands between the two of them, saying that she will not allow her son to be touched or harmed. Michael asks her to come to her senses because this is no longer her son, but zombies who eat people, and if she continues to protect him, she will be in serious danger. The woman begins to have a hysterical panic and says that she doesn't believe it, because this is her beloved boy and he's just a little sick and she needs to wait until they invent a cure. She tries to dissuade our protagonist from killing her son while the infected rushes to attack. The main character is trying his best to convince the woman, and also to warn her that she needs to evade. But all his attempts are in vain, and moments later her body is pierced by a powerful blow, and blood splashes scatter everywhere. The child begins to eat his mother's body, and Michael immediately rushes to her aid in the hope of saving the poor woman. Lying on the floor bleeding, at the last moment she manages to grab the main character by the leg, and even being on the verge of death, asks not to kill her son. The protagonist, with despair in his eyes, explains that if a person turns, he cannot be saved and he cannot allow him to walk the streets of the city threatening other survivors. Living the last moment of her life, a woman loosens her grip and continues to assert the opposite until the very end. The main character deals with her son with one swing of his dagger, and blood splashes scatter throughout the room. He calmly leaves, leaving the corpses of the entire family lying on the floor and regretting that this happened. I go down to the next floors behind my back. He leaves a taut wire with bells hanging on it, which act as an alarm. Once on the next floor, he sees in front of him a huge muscular man, who in ordinary life was a fitness trainer. The colossal-sized infected immediately rushes to attack our protagonist, holding a huge iron dumbbell in both hands. Michael manages to avoid the blow, but the strength with which this zombie attacks is truly impressive because the stronger a person was before infection, the greater the danger he poses in zombie form. Not allowing the main character to breathe, the zombie immediately throws an iron dumbbell in his direction, which Michael also manages to dodge and jump to the door behind him. After landing, a powerful explosion is heard as another very powerful mutant appears from the apartment behind him. His appearance clearly takes our protagonist by surprise, and he manages to receive several wounds. In addition to the powerful zombie trainer, who has incredible strength, he faces a zombified animal that looks like a huge dog. It immediately rushes to attack the main character, but Michael at the last moment manages to parry the attack, finding himself on the brink of death. The zombie dog still manages to touch our protagonist, and a few drops of blood begin to fall down the floors. They fly past the stairs, attracting the attention of all the mutated people nearby inside the building. Michael understands that the situation he is in is very difficult, and in addition to two strong infected, he has attracted the attention of a large number of small individuals. The seriousness of the situation is reinforced by the fact that he had already received quite a large number of wounds. The huge zombie trainer does not allow him to catch his breath and continues to attack with incredible force, destroying everything around him. The main character still manages to counterattack the attacker, delivering a powerful longitudinal blow to the entire body of the zombie. The wounds received are not even enough to unbalance the zombie, and he continues to attack with even greater fury. The situation is also aggravated by the zombie, a beast that complements attacks with its speed and teeth as sharp as a knife blade. Michael decides to regroup and retreat for a while to come up with a better plan to fight them. Running down the stairs, he stumbles upon low-level zombies who were attracted by his blood and stood in his way. He finds himself squeezed in a vice where on one side his path is blocked by a crowd of infected, and from behind he is attacked by two powerful opponents. The protagonist decides to go ahead because he has no other options to get out of this situation. He begins to deal with low-level zombies at a very fast speed, trying to clear a path for himself to retreat. A huge zombie trainer throws a huge metal dumbbell towards our main character, which knocks down everything in its path. After which he looks around in the hope of finding Michael's lifeless body, but finds only the corpses of his colleagues, not understanding where he disappeared. Meanwhile, the main character manages to hide in the chaos in the nearest apartment, which apparently belonged to some gamer. Trying to catch his breath, the main character tries to understand why the infected are developing so quickly because their strength has already gone beyond the first stage of the apocalypse. While he was thinking about the fact that the evolution of the infected was proceeding at incredible speed, his opponents were already combing the apartment in which he was hiding with might and main. A huge zombie fitness trainer finds our protagonist, who has been hiding behind the back of the sofa all this time. Without wasting time to think, he immediately attacks the main character, who, in turn, tries to protect himself from the blow by taking all the energy upon himself. The energy from the impact turns out to be so powerful that Michael's body breaks through several concrete walls, ending up in the next room. For some time he loses consciousness and, drowning in emptiness, realizes that even after rebirth he still remains a worthless and weak person, unable to change anything. Lying in a pile of concrete rubble, the sound of the tearing bells that he left on the upper floors brings him to consciousness. He immediately remembers his younger sister, whom he promised to protect at all costs, and this thought gives him strength. Michael decides to immediately spend the points he has on pumping up his speed and strength, which allows him to get back on his feet. He hurries up to his apartment as soon as possible, destroying all low-level infected with one blow thanks to the improvements he has received. At this time, Sylvia hears strange sounds outside the door and hopes that it is her brother and decides to open the door. Meanwhile, two infected people are standing outside, on whose bodies the light from our hero's apartment begins to shine, but Michael is already rushing to the rescue. In a moment, having dealt with the zombie, he goes to the door and asks his sister if everything is okay with her, asking her not to worry because he's fine. Meanwhile, a couple of powerful infected have already managed to reach their shelter, and he asks Sylvia to close the door and not open it to anyone at all costs. Michael points a dagger towards the zombies, saying that he will not allow them to take a step in his direction. The zombie fitness trainer begins to scream furiously, uttering the same phrase asking for a membership card to their gym. Having taken one extra step, the hero immediately rushes into the attack, cutting off his leg, saying that he warned about the consequences. After which he immediately jumps up, soaring into the air and throwing his dagger with all his might into the body of the zombie beast. At the same time, during the landing, he delivers a powerful kick to the zombie trainer, hitting his head on the concrete floor. The main character hurries to return his weapon by pulling it out of the dog's body, and at this time the zombie trainer again tries to attack him, although he moves much more slowly. Increasing characteristics by pumping up skills allows Michael to cut the mutant's body into small pieces by making several powerful attacks. Our protagonist emerges victorious from this battle, and since these zombies turned out to be of a higher level, he receives more points for them. He also notes that there is very little time left before the crazy evolution of zombies, and, if everything continues to move at such a speed, he needs to adapt as soon as possible. After some time, Michael finishes checking all floors of his house, completely clearing it of infected people. After such an exhausting night, he returns to his home and decides to take a shower while distributing the accumulated skill points. The main character decides to develop his skills evenly, investing little by little in each available skill line. In the evening of the same day, having rested a little, he decides to check how his sister is feeling and talk a little with her about what happened. Sylvia says that she watched the news that said that zombies have appeared all over the world, but the authorities assure that they can completely cope. Michael promises that they will definitely be able to cope completely, because even in case of failure, he will always be there and will definitely protect his sister. Sylvia says that today she was very scared because she was worried that her brother would not come back. If she could walk, she would have made every effort to make their survival easier. The main character tries to cheer up his sister by saying that she will definitely be able to get back on her feet, and she, in turn, asks not to feel sorry for her because it is impossible. Reflecting on everything that happened, Michael hopes that there is a chance to cure his sister because today the meteor shower will begin, which became a turning point after the start of the apocalypse. After some time, a huge number of meteorites begin to fall from the sky, and Michael remembers that in his past life this caused the first evolution of zombies. Inside these meteorites there are special cores that can strengthen both zombies and ordinary people. If he can get them in sufficient quantities, he will change the world. Together with his sister, they watch from the roof of the house as a meteor shower begins to destroy everything around, turning our civilization into stone ruins. At one point, one of the meteorites falls right near the house of our main characters, which could well have ended their lives. Looking at the map, Michael realizes that he fell a short distance from their house, and with his speed he can get there within an hour. The main character decides to make some preparations, and the next morning go to the site of the meteorite fall to get the core and try to cure his sister. A smile appears on his face because he begins to believe that a small ray of hope has appeared in their lives for at least a fleeting bright future. The day after meteorites riddled all the fruits of the civilization of our world, there is a huge dusty haze over the city. At this time, Sylvia realizes that her brother wants to go outside the house and tries to dissuade him, saying that it is unsafe. Michael explains that he is going outside on a very important matter, and is doing it for her and all humanity. His sister, with a displeased expression on her face, asks him not to talk about it because she would prefer that her brother be safe and sound in exchange for the ability to walk. The main character asks for forgiveness and says that there is complete confusion, finally leaving his sister a walkie-talkie, thanks to which they can keep in touch. Going down the elevator to the first floor, the protagonist is slightly upset, realizing that he could have offended his beloved sister. His thoughts are interrupted by Sylvia, who decides to check if the walkie-talkie is working and asks for forgiveness for her behavior, saying that she understands that all this is being done for her sake. Once on the first floor, Michael asks for forgiveness and says that he needs to go and asks his sister not to go anywhere until he arrives. Finally, the girl tells him to check his pockets, in which she left him her hairpin, which he must return to her upon his return. Michael leaves the walls of his house, promising to return before dark, and begins to move towards the fallen meteorite, avoiding unnecessary collisions with the infected. At this time in the city, a group of military personnel is clearing out infected people, trying to keep the situation under control. One of the soldiers reports to the commander that all the mutated ones in the western part of the city have been eliminated, and their number has noticeably decreased after the meteor shower. Meanwhile, a tall and stately woman named Megan receives a report from a soldier, and is their commander. Her assistant named Lena says that it is necessary to issue new instructions to the soldiers and continue clearing the city. Megan orders them to continue patrolling the area and make sure they don't miss any infected people. At the same time, their conversation is interrupted by a man sitting at the table, who jumps up and asks the woman to immediately accompany them to the company. Megan grabs him by the shirt, explaining that she is a police officer, not his personal bodyguard, and if his life is dear to him, he must listen to everything she orders. Looking at him with a frightening gaze, the girl asks him to express all the complaints that do not suit him in the current circumstances. Frightened by the pressure from Megan, the man finds nothing better than to agree and stop being nervous. Leaving the men in jackets alone, the commander asks Lena to contact Mr. Leonardo, who needs to convey some information. At the same time, the second man sitting at the table looks at Megan angrily, promising that one day he will get this ferocious cat. Having contacted Mr. Leonardo, Megan reports that all the zombies in the area have disappeared somewhere, and most likely this is due to yesterday's meteor shower, and for now they will continue patrolling. Meanwhile, Michael moves towards the crater left by the meteorite, trying to minimize collisions with the infected so as not to attract unnecessary attention. After some time, he finds himself at the very crater from the crater of which a huge amount of dark energy emanates. The main character decides not to rush to hasty conclusions and explore the surroundings by climbing onto the nearest high-rise building. He sees how in the center of the crater there is a fragment of a meteorite, emitting a huge amount of energy, and in a past life he had never seen it alive. Also, near one of the walls of the crater, he notices a zombie who is trying to get out, and who is not at all interested in absorbing the fragment. Michael understands that time is beginning to move towards sunset. If he delays, the zombie may absorb the energy, and this will become a very big problem for him. The main character makes a decision, using his speed, not to enter into confrontation and simply pick up the fragment and run away. Once at the very crater, he makes a lightning dash towards the zombie in the hope of catching it by surprise and quickly finishing it off. When striking an infected person's body, his homemade weapon breaks as if it were made of glass, and the zombie's skin turns out to be as strong as steel. The zombie girl turns to our main character and greets him, and her appearance clearly says that she is clearly not a weak individual. Michael manages to notice her black eyeballs and golden pupils, as well as tattoos all over her body, and concludes that in front of him is a native zombie. For a few seconds he is seized by primal horror, since in his past life they most instilled terror in humanity, and were superior in strength to anyone else. In an instant, the infected gets closer to our protagonist, grabbing him by the remains of a homemade spear and throwing him into the air with incredible ease. Trying to land on the ground, our main character begins to get in the way of vines shooting from the ground like bullets. Having managed to get his dagger, he manages to chop up the annoying plants and remain unharmed. Michael understands that the original zombies have special abilities, and their strength and speed are at a very high level, making them not the easiest opponents. While he is trying to understand why such strong zombies began to appear so early, the girl does not give him the opportunity to think and attacks him again. The protagonist decides not to engage in battle and simply try to pick up the fragment and run away, avoiding unnecessary damage. Numerous vines suddenly stand in his way again, not giving him the opportunity to just do it. The native zombie smiles as if mocking our main character and is just having fun. The speed of her skills does not give our protagonist even the slightest second to think and make decisions, and he has to defend himself all the time. Their powers at this moment in time are at completely different levels, and even trying to defend himself, Michael still receives a lot of damage. Realizing the sadness of his situation, he understands that events are developing much faster than in his previous life and, apparently, history is changing. At the same time, Michael notices how a fragment of a meteorite and a zombie are connected by an invisible energy thread. He suggests that the native zombie, like all the others, arose from these fragments and act as its protectors. The main character assumes that in this case the infected woman will not be able to move far from the fragment, and decides to break the distance with her by going beyond the crater. The zombie girl tries to stop the protagonist with a vine branch, but he manages to defend himself and chop them into pieces. Finding himself beyond her reach, Michael manages to take a breath for a while and decide what to do next. He decides to take refuge in a nearby building and use it as a temporary shelter to regroup and come up with a new plan. He takes out a red glass flask from his backpack and decides on an ambitious plan, saying that he will need the blood of a dead man. After some time, he, riding a motorcycle, leads a huge horde of infected people, which he managed to lure from all over the area. Finding himself near the crater where the original specimen is located, he throws a test tube of blood into the air, putting his plan into action. The main character manages to break the test tube, and the entire contents fall in a bloody rain. His plan was to use the dead man's blood as bait for a large number of low-level zombies that the original zombie would have to fight. Such impudence and insidious plan infuriates the female, and she begins to attack everything that tries to harm her with even greater speed and fury. Michael begins to observe everything that is happening from afar and hopes that his plan will have at least some effect. Even with an incredible superiority in strength, the original zombie cannot so quickly deal with the horde of infected attacking it, and they simply crush it with numbers. The presence of intelligence in the original zombie allows her to get out of such a difficult situation and use her vine to soar into the air. Being out of reach of ordinary low-level zombies, she begins to attack them from safety. Michael at this moment decides to come closer to the crater and try to steal the fragment, while the original is busy fighting. The only thing that worries our main character in this situation is a large accumulation of mutants, because of which he himself may fall into a trap. The protagonist also understands that he cannot delay this battle, otherwise the fragment will have time to restore the energy of the female, and will become even more difficult. Unexpectedly for everyone present, a very powerful and ominous roar is heard, which can only mean one thing. Looking around, Michael and the original zombie notice a huge and ferocious mutated beast. He immediately rushes to attack the female because he perfectly senses her strength, and understands that she must be dealt with first. The beast manages to knock her to the ground, pressing her with his paw, intending to tear her into small pieces. The main character realizes the deplorability of the situation, but understands that the animal has every chance of emerging victorious from this fight. But looking at its fur, he understands that it will soon mutate. This will happen if the mutated beast manages to absorb a meteorite fragment, and in this case, trying to emerge victorious from this battle will be pointless. The original zombie, being in a not the most advantageous position, still manages to attack the beast with the help of its strength, throwing it to the side. The mutant clearly does not like this and, with even greater animal rage inherent in him, rushes to attack the zombies. Without having time to react and keep up with the reaction speed of the infected beast, he still manages to sink his knife-sharp teeth into the body of the female individual. Michael understands that the situation is taking a very unexpected turn and is already preparing to stop the beast from finishing what he started. Because if the original one loses, the situation will become even more deplorable. At the last moment, the main character still decides to stop, not believing that such a powerful opponent with intelligence lost so easily. At the same second, a fountain of blood begins to gush from the mouth of the mutated beast, and the roots of the vine pierce its body. His body soars high into the sky, hanging on the spear-sharp branches of the vine, signifying his defeat in this battle. The main character understands that all this was just a plan of the original zombie to lure him closer to himself in order to deal with two opponents with one blow. The female begins to smile and praise our main character, saying that the pathetic little man was not so simple as to believe in such a trick. Michael also says that she is not the easiest opponent, and he will have to work hard to emerge victorious, after which he goes downstairs into the arena, causing surprise to the original, who did not think that he would personally come to her to die and lose. The female decides not to hesitate and immediately tries to attack him with her roots, but Michael manages to defend himself once again. He continues to fend off numerous attacks with the help of the vine and notices that the battle with the infected beast and a huge number of low-level zombies has greatly exhausted the original one. At her limit, she tries to move into close combat and attack Michael personally. This act turns out to be very reckless, since the main character manages to cut off her attacker's hand without any problems with one deft movement. After this, the original zombie is overcome by animalistic rage and misunderstanding of how a pathetic human being is capable of such a thing and promises to finish him off here and now. The main character turns out to be quite surprised that the female still has the strength to fight, and all this time she has not shown her maximum. Looking around, he notices that the original is beginning to absorb the energy of the fragment, and, with its help, restore her wounds. After a few moments, she takes on a new form, becoming similar to a rose flower and becoming much stronger. Her speed and strength increase 100-fold, and she begins to try to finish off our protagonist. Michael understands that with the current level of strength he will in no way be able to defeat such a powerful individual and again tries to escape, but his escape route is blocked by vine branches. The firstborn says that such a trick won't work with her twice, and here and now they will decide which of them will be stronger. The main character is slowly starting to run out of strength to dodge and defend himself, and one of the blows almost reaches its target. But at the last moment, the branches of the vine stop attacking Michael, and the body of the original zombie begins to emit fountains of blood. The protagonist understands that the female could not withstand such a strong energy from the fragment, and moreover, her body is very exhausted after so many battles. She tries with all her strength to attack Michael, saying that some pathetic little man cannot defeat her. Without any problems, repelling the next attacks of the original zombie, Michael says that by continuing to fight she will finish herself off. Using his speed, he closes the distance with her, realizing that the outcome of the battle is already predetermined. The exhausted female falls to the ground and prepares to accept her fate, realizing the deplorability of her situation. The main character threatens her with his dagger, and it is said that he knew the outcome of this battle from the very beginning. Looking at the dying original zombie, he remembers that in the past he could not imagine that he would ever be able to defeat such a strong opponent. In the past, due to the strength of the enemy, he made the wrong choice and regretted it for a very long time, so he decides to swear to stand on his feet until his last breath, protecting what is dear to him. The context window informs our main character that for killing a native zombie he receives 100 evolution points. Michael could not imagine that he would receive so many points for defeating her and decides that in future he needs to be more careful with other fragments. After his triumphant victory, he decides to take the meteorite and is surprised that he can safely touch it with his hands. Touching the fragment with his hand, he feels how its energy begins to fill his body, restoring his strength. Michael is in complete shock, realizing that all his wounds have almost completely disappeared and hopes that his sister will also be able to recover and start walking. Just before leaving, he looks back at the body of the infected beast because he hears strange sounds and assumes that the monster is still alive. A huge amount of energy begins to leave his body, plunging the main character into horror that he faces another battle. His face shows incredible surprise at what he saw, and he cannot believe his eyes. From the body of a huge mutated beast came a small puppy with yellow fur. He takes him in his arms and suggests that after the death of his mother, the cub in her womb absorbed all her powers and because of this was able to survive. Michael suggests that he can tame the newborn monster if he becomes the first one he sees when he opens his eyes. The puppy begins to bark joyfully and lick the cheeks of our main character, thinking that he is part of his family. The protagonist decides to name his new pet Goldie and, having hidden it in his backpack along with a meteorite fragment, decides to return to his shelter as soon as possible. Moving through the streets of the city, a strange energy envelopes everything in the area, attracting crowds of the infected. This energy comes from meteorite fragments, which our main character carries in his backpack and acts as bait for the infected. Before he can reach his shelter, the ground under his feet begins to crack and crumble into small pieces. Michael manages to dodge and realizes that all this time someone has been chasing him, and he won't let him get away just like that. A huge number of mutated giant rats begin to appear from the ground, which have been following the energy of the meteorite all this time. The main character manages to defend himself from the attack of rodents, realizing that his position is not the most advantageous, and now he cannot just fight them. At this time, Assistant Lena asks her commander to take a break and at least get some sleep because she has been on her feet for a very long time. Megan says that she doesn't have time for this and continues to observe the situation and notices how our main character runs in the distance and reports that he sees a survivor. The girl is quite surprised at the speed with which our main character moves, and also notices that he is being pursued by a huge flock of giant rats. Although Megan is not able to understand how this man managed to avoid so many attacks from infected animals, she still decides to help him. Meanwhile, the main character moves towards their shelter, assuming that this building will be suitable for a temporary shelter where he can catch his breath. Once on the territory of the building, iron bars and concrete walls manage to delay the mutants pursuing him for some time. Michael, having managed to get to the garage, sits down on the floor and tries to come up with a further plan for his actions, assuming that today he will not be able to get home and will have to spend the night somewhere else. Opening his backpack to check if Goldie and the meteorite fragment are okay, he discovers that the crystal has simply disappeared. The first thing our protagonist managed to think was that the fragment was missing or that his animal managed to absorb it. All these assumptions are immediately dispelled when the context menu of the evolution tree tells him that the absorption of the crystal has been completed and the process of restructuring has begun. At the same second, the main character's body is enveloped in an incomprehensible aura and he begins to experience a very wild pain tearing him to pieces. A moment later, his body begins to emit massive amounts and waves of energy, knocking back everything that was near him. At the same moment, the rats chasing our main character manage to get through the concrete barrier and get into the parking lot. Michael realizes the deplorability of the current situation, but cannot find the strength to gather his courage and at least try to stand up, and the tree of evolution is to blame for this. His eyes begin to close, and he slowly loses consciousness, not believing that he will be dead here and now. At the last moment, Goldie manages to save her owner by repelling the attack of the rats and coming to his defense. The little puppy's body becomes coated with a thin layer of electricity and begins to emit large amounts of energy. He stands between the attacking rats and the body of his master, ready to give his life for his protection. Goldie begins to fight hordes of rats, attacking them with bolts of electricity and using her speed and size as an advantage. The number of infected turns out to be too large, and through a gap in the walls, even low-level individuals manage to get inside and surround our main character. The faithful puppy does not have time to keep up with so many opponents, and he has to continue the battle with the rats located outside the building. Before making an attack and finishing off our main character, one of the rats suffers inevitable death from being hit by a bullet from a weapon. At that same second, other surviving people, armed and arriving to help our main character, appear in the parking lot. The gray-haired man asks Megan if they should have brought strangers to the shelter because if he was bitten they would have a very hard time. The commander replies that they cannot abandon the survivor, they need to isolate him and observe him. The survivors manage to take refuge inside the building, while Goldie remains on the street to protect the shelter from the infected attacking it. At this time, being unconscious, Michael wakes up in the sanctuary of the Tree of Evolution, which has noticeably changed. His body begins to become covered with clots of yellow energy, merging into one with the set of genes that he had. This process takes a very long time, but at some point our main character regains consciousness. During the time that Michael was passed out, his faithful companion spent all this time fighting hordes of zombies. Having opened his eyes, our main character realizes that his head is splitting, and he is trying to remember all the events that happened to him before he lost consciousness. Megan, who is in the same room with him, immediately points a gun at him and orders him not to move and to answer her questions first. Michael replies that he doesn't have time for that and needs to urgently go about things that are a higher priority. The girl is about to tell the main character that he won't just leave, when he suddenly appears behind her back. The main character manages to disarm Megan and throw her to the ground, answering that she does not have enough strength to just stop him. At that same second, all the survivors enter the room and ask Michael not to move or make sudden movements, otherwise they will open fire. Megan orders her men not to move and explains that she is the commander of the military police, and they were the ones who saved him from certain death. One of the two men in suits says that the main character is an ungrateful, impudent man, and they shouldn't have babysat him for 4 whole days. Hearing this, Michael completely forgets about everything that happened, realizing that he had been passed out for 4 whole days. He immediately rushes towards the exit, realizing that all this time his sister is alone and in possible danger. Megan manages to stop him, saying that the street is full of zombies and it's too dangerous there, and invites him to stay in their squad. While Michael asks what will happen if he refuses this offer, a huge terrifying silhouette can be seen outside the window of the room in which they are located. In an instant, the monster bursts into the room, destroying everything in its path and emitting a frantic scream. All survivors immediately rush in different directions trying to protect themselves and everyone around them. Stunned Lena, while still a schoolgirl, experiences incredible fear and simply cannot move while standing in one place. The main character manages to save the defenseless girl by stopping the monster's huge paw with his body and blocking his path. In the moment he realizes that he himself did not understand how he managed to do this, and most likely his dexterity has increased significantly. Just like his physical skills, not one person on the planet is capable of holding back such an incredible force of a mutant thrusting at him with his bare hands. All the survivors, looking at what is happening, cannot believe their eyes and doubt that the stranger they met is an ordinary person. Using the newly acquired powers, the main character manages to throw the monster's body back. Realizing that his physical indicators have increased, he immediately rushes to the attack, intending to start a battle with the huge mutant. At the last moment, his fist stops right in front of the beast's nose, and waves of energy from his blows spread across the ground. The main character realizes that there is no monster in front of him, but his little tame dog Goldie, who has grown very much in 4 days. He begins to joyfully wag his tail and lick his owner, rejoicing at his return. Michael decides to check his skills and notice that all the evolution points have disappeared, and a new improvement point has appeared called Gene Enhancement. I'm trying to remember everything that happened. He understands that something amazing obviously happened to him, and most likely all the points were spent on his evolution. Plunging into his consciousness, he sees that the sanctuary tree of evolution has also changed and apparently, he has experienced the first improvement of genes. When asked what happened to him, the context menu answers that the main character reached his limit, and a meteorite fragment helped him overcome it. Michael remembers that every person has a genetic limit, and in a past life he saw high-ranking fighters who tried to overcome it, but in the end died. This term is called gene restrictions, and apparently our protagonist is able to develop indefinitely bypassing this prohibition. Having realized what happened to him, Michael, riding a dog, returns to the survivors, who are both surprised and very frightened. Michael explains that until recently Goldie was very tiny, but after eating so many zombies he grew to such size. Megan, like everyone else present, does not understand how the monster can be his pet. The main character says that this is a long story and he will tell about it later, but now he needs to deal with the crowd of infected people pouring here. Noticing a huge number of zombies on the horizon, Megan realizes that their strength is not enough to resist such a horde. The girl says that they have nowhere else to go, and they were able to find this place after a week of searching after the start of the apocalypse, and they have no other place. And Michael begins to warm up and asks the girl not to worry, because there is a military shelter 40 kilometers from here, and they can go there. The main character asks them to wait in a safe place while he alone deals with all the infected, and Megan says that this is just madness. Michael asks to follow his instructions and then rides into battle on his tame dog. Lena, looking at everything that is happening, asks her commander whether this stranger will be able to return safe and sound and escort them to the shelter. Having reached the right place, the main character decides not to fight with his bare hands and tear the road sign out of the ground. He attracts the infected with a loud bang of metal and asks Goldie to stand aside because he wants to test his new abilities. Faced with a crowd of infected, he makes a powerful blow with a road sign, destroying a huge number of low-level zombies in a second. Michael understands that in a short period he has become much stronger, making his blows many times more deadly. Gradually dealing with ordinary zombies, an awakened infected who has reached the initial level becomes on his way. The classification that our main character uses has been preserved from a past life, when the infected were assigned a rank, and this individual, although he has incredible strength, is still not gifted with intelligence. Trying to deliver a powerful blow to the mutant's head with a road sign, it does not bring visible results, and the metal bends like plasticine. At this time, the survivors, led by Megan, finish collecting supplies from their old shelter and wait for the return of our protagonist. The man in the suit begins to panic, suggesting that he may not return and then they will turn out to be easy prey while here. The girl says that they need to stick to the plan and not panic, otherwise they will have no chance of survival. The man says that they saw perfectly well how a crowd of zombies was rushing towards him, and in such a situation not a single person is able to survive, and if they just sit and wait, then everyone will die. He adds that if they had not saved this guy that time, they would not have been in this situation, and if he voluntarily decided to become bait, then they need to get out of here as soon as possible. Megan asks her to stop causing panic and acting recklessly, asking her friend Leonardo to come to her defense. The gray-haired man says that he also thinks that they need to leave because they don't know if that guy is alive, and they shouldn't take such risks. For a second, there is a dead silence among the survivors, and the girl agrees to go and check how things are going at the front. Leonardo and Lena try to dissuade her, but Megan declares that this is the best option she can take. At that very second, their conversation is interrupted by the loud scream of a zombie who is behind them. Deciding that imminent death awaits them all, the infected immediately receives a powerful blow to his skull and flies away in an unknown direction. Michael stands in front of the survivors, saying that he ran into a little trouble on the way back and hopes he didn't keep them waiting too long. Megan says that they should be the ones apologizing because the police sent the civilian into the thick of things. The main character reports that if it weren't for their help, he would have been a corpse a long time ago, and as a sign of gratitude, he cleared most of the zombies in the area, which would allow them to move on. Michael says that riding Goldie they can get to the shelter, and the road should be clear of mutants. Megan is quite taken aback by such a statement, and decides to clarify why the main character will not go to the shelter with them. Michael states that he has unfinished business, and needs to find his little sister as soon as possible. Having seated all the survivors on the back of her tame dog, Megan returns his backpack to him, and wishes him good luck in finding his sister. Finally, the girl decides to find out the name of our main character, and asks to come back as soon as possible. As he watches them go, the protagonist hopes that they will not have time to get to the shelter in the near future, because at this midnight the first stage of the apocalypse will end and awakened zombies will appear. The main character's increased physical performance allows him to move through the city ruins at incredible speed. In a short time, having reached his old house, he notices that mountains of corpses are lying everywhere, and traces of shooting are also visible. Using a walkie-talkie, Michael tries to contact Sylvia while trying to find out why the military was clearing areas and not evacuating civilians. Climbing the stairs to the upper floors of the building, he suggests that these could be ordinary looters who, taking advantage of martial law, are causing unrest. Having reached his apartment, he notices that everything around him has been looted, and the front door has simply been broken down. Sylvia is also not inside the apartment, and all he finds is a wheelchair and a broken photograph lying on the floor. At this very second, the main character is overcome by incredible rage, and he promises to finish off everyone involved in the kidnapping of his younger sister. In the evening of the same day, a group of survivors drives around the city in a car and shoots the infected who come their way. At one point, their car, filled to the brim with supplies, gets stuck in a crowd of zombies, and the driver asks his commander what to do next. Their commander turns out to be the man who kidnapped the protagonist's sister, and he says that he has already told his uncle their location and they will be taken away soon. Sylvia asks her captors why they are doing this. Because humanity should have united and fought together against such a terrible threat. The man grins, saying that he has no desire to die for others and now is the time to use the situation to expand his power. At that very moment, their conversation is interrupted by Michael, who lands on the hood of their car. He immediately grabs one of the shooters defending the car and throws him into the crowd of infected. The driver of the car tries to threaten the main character with a pistol, but he sends him flying with a powerful kick. Their commander takes a knife out of his pocket and, threatening to kill the defenseless girl, orders the main character not to move and to bow his head. Michael, experiencing incredible anger, breaks the man's hand with lightning speed, knocking the knife out of his hand and sending him into shock. He immediately begins to threaten the main character, trying to trump his family connections and the fact that they will definitely find him and save him. The main character says that he knows very well that in front of him is a local bandit who uses the martial law and his uncle's connections to do whatever he wants. Michael holds the man's body over a crowd of infected people, threatening to throw him to be torn to pieces by this entire crowd. The kidnapper of his sister begins to pitifully beg for mercy, saying that he will do whatever our main character wants and will carry out any of his orders. Realizing that persuasion does not work for our protagonist, his pleas are replaced by aggression and harsh threats. At this time, 2 helicopters appear above the heads of our heroes, which apparently arrived at the call of this man to save them. The man begins to laugh, thinking that salvation is close, but the main character simply lets him go, and he falls into a crowd of infected that begins to eat him. One of the people who arrived by helicopter notices everything that is happening and asks to connect him with Commander Roger. A man reports that his nephew was killed by some unknown youth, and that a little girl is in his company. Commander Roger, who apparently was the same uncle who was threatened by the murdered man, orders the main character to clear the area. Fire from 2 helicopters opens on our heroes, and Michael, holding his defenseless sister in his arms, tries to find shelter. Having time to react to the fact that they were fired upon with missiles, he moves to the nearest building to find temporary shelter there. He manages to run inside and avoid a direct hit from such a powerful weapon and save his younger sister. The main character finds a safe room in which he leaves Sylvia and asks him to wait here until he completely understands. The girl understands the gravity of the current circumstances and asks her brother to be very careful and returns safe and sound. After which Michael, leaving his sister in a safe place, returns to the street to deal with 2 military helicopters.